Look out for the lilies in the boulevard. Watch out for the readers in the courtyard.
All right, welcome everybody, and welcome to the HALT Virtual Skills Lab. My name is Sana, and I'll be hosting this webinar today. Just before we begin, can everyone please write in the chat box where in the world you're joining from? I already see a few people. Tokyo, South Africa, Netherlands, Japan, Syria. Wow, wonderful. A very international group, love it. So as you guys continue to type in where you're coming from, I'm just going to play a quick short video about HALT.
We humans, we love to learn. We've got the hands, feet, ears, eyes, mouth, nose, and brain to figure out what works and what doesn't work from the world around us. It's instinctive, it's natural, and it works. So why not learn business this way? The secret to building the skills employers actually want is practice. Practice, practice, practice. So why not start in the classroom? At HALT, we take the theory, the research, the expertise, and we put the challenge into your hands so you find out what happens for yourself. We're not just about what sticks in your brain, but how you flex it. Because real life is not found on an exam. And with career coaching, there's no way you're not hitting your goals. Thanks, coach. Graduation, it's more than finals. You'll have a proven skill set from working on real-world business challenges so you can smash any interview and make an impact on the job from day one. Because grades alone don't show who you really are. P.S. With campuses around the world, you're about to go global. There are a lot of places where you could learn about the business world. There aren't many places where you can live it. To learn business, you've got to do business. Makes sense, doesn't it? HALT, for those made to do.
All right.
We humans.
Okay, so the HALT Virtual Skills Lab is an opportunity for you to join with like-minded people from all over the globe, hear from our absolutely incredible professors on the latest topics and trends, and level up your knowledge in all things business and cultural. For any of you joining a HALT event for the first time, I just want to give you a little bit of a background about us. HALT is a school that focuses on the future, firmly rooted in the real world of dynamic global businesses. As a HALT student, your entire curriculum is geared toward practical experience that aims to transform your mind as well as your skill set. Today, we're joined by HALT Professor Gonzalez to explore the topic of how to take care of your financial future. Professor Gonzalez's masterclass will last about 45 minutes, including questions. So please make sure to write your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat box, and he will answer them at the end of the class. We'll also be emailing you a recording of this webinar in the next few days. I'll hand over to you now, Professor Gonzalez, and enjoy.
Thank you, Sana, and welcome everyone. Let me share my screen. And hopefully everyone is seeing my presentation. Can you confirm that, Sana, for me?
Yes, we can see your screen, Professor.
Okay, great, great. I really hope that we have the chance to actually meet one another in a classroom at some point in time in the future. But I did want to share a few concepts about doing what's right for us and from a financial perspective. And the topic itself, as you can see in the title, is pay yourself. And the whole concept behind this, you'll be seeing this as we evolve in our conversations, but the whole concept behind this is that we tend to be very mindful about our obligations to others. But the question that I'd like to propose that you start considering starting today is whether you are as responsible towards yourselves. And that's a question that sometimes it's hard to answer. Sometimes it's painful to answer, but I think it's a question that's worth asking. So let's start with our conversation. And the first thing is to kind of give you a general idea of how we're starting. I'm going to be initially discussing debt management. Of course, as you may already realize, right, these topics can last for a whole course, right? And we have a limited amount of time today, but I hope to leave you with some tidbits about how we can do both debt management and, very importantly, as well, saving for our future. We all know what the first is and the second, right? We all understand what debt management implies. We all understand what savings means, but I'd like to, as I said, share a few ideas with you, share some research, some behavioral finance research that is it's quite helpful in to kind of understand the way we behave as human beings. So let me start with that. But before we get to the point of management, I just to share some statistics, which are interesting. If you grab U.S. data, and of course we are from all over the world, so these numbers will certainly vary according to the traditions, culture, to the safety net that we have in different countries, and so on and so forth. So there is variation, but it's important to, I think we can generalize and say that if we actually look back at how much we have saved, or our notion about what saving means for the future, that we may realize that most of us are not doing enough. In the United States, for example, the average savings rate is about 3.7% of disposable income, which means that out of every $100 of income, only $3.7 are saved. The rest are basically consumed. Now, there are stages in our lives where that consumption is understandable, and sometimes we can explain it. But I'm going to propose that there's always something you can do in order to try and raise that bar a little bit more. So let's start with that 3.7%. This is not the world. This is just a specific location, and basically where I'm located right now. And so I'm grabbing some statistics, but you can do that for your countries, and you'll find out that there are variations, but the rates are generally a bit lower than we would like them to be. And sometimes when people talk about savings rates, they talk about household savings as a percentage of GDP and so on. But those numbers tend to overestimate the amount of savings that's actually happened. So if you look into this, you'll see that there'll be some interesting statistics for you as well. Now, when we ask people as surveys are being done and questions are being asked about how they behave, when there's a question that's, if you were to think about your emergency fund, a fund that you have in case something unexpected occurs, and as we know, unexpected things happen, right? That's almost expected, isn't it? If a crisis or health crisis or a family situation or a work situation occurs, how ready are you? How prepared are you to be able to withstand that, with your own funds? When we ask people about that, about 51% of the respondents indicated that they did have an emergency fund. But interestingly enough, 36% said that their credit card debt was actually higher than the emergency fund they have at their disposal, meaning that in actuality, they have very little of emergency fund to work with. They have more credit card debt, outstanding. So these are obligations that they have with others than any emergency fund. That's 36%. Right? Almost 40% of the respondents indicated that. Now, 13% basically said, "Hey, good news, I don't have any credit card debt. Bad news, I don't have any emergency funding savings either." So as you can see, about, if you add them all up, right, there's 49% of respondents that indicated that they basically do not have a emergency fund at their disposal. Now, if you don't have the emergency fund at your disposal, what will that mean? It would mean that if there is a financial situation, right, for example, if you lose your job or if you get sick, the amount of funds that you need in order to be able to continue to do the things and to live where you live, et cetera, are just not there. And that is a very complicated and very serious implication for not only for your financial well-being, but also for your personal well-being. You see, financial well-being and actual physical well-being are much interconnected, as I'll show you in the slide later on in the presentation. So these are very alarming statistics to a certain extent, right? The fact that 49% of the people that are surveyed would not be able to withstand an emergency situation because they will not have funds. Now, this is generational as well. If you ask different segments of the population, how much, which is the source of funding that's highest? Is it credit card or is it emergency funds? Depending on where you're located in these generations. If you're Gen Z, for example, 38% indicate that they had more credit card debt than emergency fund, while 45% provided the same answer. Your millennials. Now, granted that different stages in your life means that you will have more than likely a higher level of obligations, of financial obligations. For example, it could be that the millennials are more into the house purchasing stage of their lives. But nevertheless, even so, the fact that people are relying very heavily on credit card debt is a source of concern, because credit card debt is not inexpensive. Sure, they always make it easy for you to pay in installments, right? Generally, they want you to pay in 16 months, but they're charging you for that money, right? They want you to pay in installments. They want you to take 16 months to pay, because during that point in time, they're going to be able to charge you the interest expense that they charge you, which could be 14, 15, 16, 17%. So, they're very nice about giving you the chance to pay 16 months, but that's because if you pay earlier, then you're going to pay much less interest expense than if you pay later. So this reliance on credit card debt rather than reliance on your own emergency funds is something that, again, is very eye-opening. And as I said, it varies with different stages in your lives. Now, in this context, let's talk about a few things that you can do in order to manage your debt or your financial obligations, right? We have different names for them depending on what kind of obligations you have. But in essence, these are obligations towards others. So this is money that's no longer yours. This is money that you have to pay to others. The first thing is to basically be aware of how much you actually owe others. And I know this sounds a bit trivial, but this is an exercise that we seldom do. If you write up a list of basically, which are your obligations, and preferably also indicate the amount, and of course, also the amount of, if it's an obligation that requires an interest payment, include that too. So in essence, you can have a snapshot of what are your main obligations and what are the main costs related to those obligations. So add them all up, and there you have your overall debt. Now, you should repeat this periodically. Try to do this every 2 or 3 months. And the essence of doing this is basically to determine whether your obligations are growing or shrinking, right? If they are shrinking, then that means you're making your way towards reducing that dependency. But if you're growing, then it's also a red light, or at the very least, it's a yellow light saying, hey, you're borrowing more, you have higher obligations, what's up, right? So it's easy to basically tap into what seems to be unending resources, such as, for example, using your credit cards, without realizing that you are basically levering yourself or increasing the amount of debt to a point where you're actually making your financial future more at risk. It's easy because you just tap onto this periodically, right? None of us really, sit down and say, okay, let me look at my debt. Let me see how that is evolving, and let me find out what percentage of my income that represents. We very infrequently do this, but this is something that can be very helpful. It's helpful for many reasons that I've already explained, but also it's helpful because it gets to the point of knowing yourself too, right? You have to realize how your behavior fits into a certain category of consumers. If you're someone that's more reliant or more that has a tendency to rely more on tapping onto your credit cards, this is something that you should know, because this is something that has to be, I guess, your challenge to control. It's not easy, but the alternative is much more complicated, right? The alternative is, what does your financial future look like if this behavior continues. Now, when I say your financial future, obviously this is a conversation about you at this point, but you can easily imagine that this conversation can turn very quickly into, what are you doing to support your future family, right? So what you do for yourself has very important implications for your family as well. So step number one, find out how much you owe and try to list what you owe in categories that are a function of the amount or are they a function of the interest that you pay on each obligation, okay? That's will be step number one. Step number two, find out what that debt represents as a percentage of your income. And this is very important because, of course, as I said, there are very different stages in life. And some stages in life, admittedly, they explain or justify the fact that you have more leverage, more debt in your life than other stages. For example, what is the right debt to income ratio? Well, if you are a homeowner, let's just say, then what people are looking for is about 36% or less of disposable income. So your debt should not be higher than 36% of your income. Now, if you are a renter, so therefore you have not actually borrowed in order to purchase a home, then your debt to income ratio should be about 15 to 20% or less of disposable income. These are, of course, general figures. As I told you, this changes in depending on the country, culture, and so on. But in general, that's the suggestion. And when I draw on any statistics, just be aware that on the bottom right-hand corner, you see the source where that information is being taken from for your later use and reference, hopefully. So, again, step number one, how much debt? Step number two, what does that mean as a percentage of my income? If you are above any of these numbers, then it's time to revisit and take action on what's happening, okay? Especially if you see that these numbers are not really shrinking, but actually these numbers are actually increasing. Okay, so that's step number two. And the third step is to map out a debt reduction plan. Now, there are really two general approaches. As you can imagine, there are quite a few scenarios in this area, but I like to share two basic approaches, right? The more, let's just say, financially advisable approach is to essentially attack the debt that has the highest interest expense first. So that will be, as you can see, the second part, highest percentage first. That will be the reasonable thing to do. Just because, of course, if you have debt that carries a higher interest, then that's the one that's more directly impacting your resources. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that, let's just say you have 5 different financial obligations, okay? And each financial obligation will ask you for a minimum payment to be made periodically. Let's just say, for the sake of our example, let's just say that you have to make monthly payments. So if you have these 5 different obligations with monthly payments, okay, your plan should be to comply with those minimum payments every month, okay? So let's just say that you need to pay a certain amount for obligation 1 through 5. You write your check, right? Or you send the transfer directly for the minimum payments. But then if you have excess amounts, if you have additional resources that you can use to pay down the debt, because you are on a debt reduction plan, remember, right? You're in this mode, then assign a higher amount, higher than the minimum payment, to the one that has the highest interest expense. So in essence, what you're doing is you're saying, I have these 5 obligations. I'm going to comply with my responsibility to pay the minimum payment, this month, but then I'm going to pay an extra amount beyond the minimum amount. To whom? To which of the 5? And the suggestion is choose the one that has the highest interest expense. That way, what you're really doing is paying earlier. Okay, it's making an earlier payment of that higher interest expense obligation. By doing that, you're not only reducing your debt, but you're also reducing the debt that has the highest amount of impact. Okay, I hope this is making sense. Now, I indicated that this is the more financially reasonable approach, right? Because of the higher impact of that interest expense. Now, we have to, at this point, also recognize human behavior. And sometimes the psychology of debt reduction plans is a little different than what we would call the reasonable approach, right? Sometimes we need to feel, in order to not be frustrated or disappointed at ourselves, we need to feel like we are advancing. And paying that an extra amount to the highest interest will get you there, but you will not see the immediate benefits until you actually realize that, I have dramatically reduced this high interest debt, or I have paid off this high interest debt. So this disappointment sometimes makes people kind of like, lose their path and kind of just say, oh, forget it, I can't do this. So sometimes the psychology of the approach matters, and therefore it may be to your interest to actually do the smallest dollar amount debt first. In other words, rather than selecting the debt that has a higher interest expense, select the debt that has the lowest amount of dollar obligations, or whatever your currency may be, and try to pay that sooner than the others. Now, the amount that has a lower debt outstanding balance may not be the one that has the highest interest expense. But the fact that it's the smallest one will allow you to actually pay it off sooner. And so you can claim success, in a much shorter period of time. And sometimes the psychology of saying, hey, I can do this. I've just paid down the debt. So out of the 5 that I had, I've just paid down 1 of them. And now I have only 4. That motivates you to continue to address the other 4 that are still pending, and they may have higher interest expenses. So there's sometimes, for psychological reasons, for reasons of us feeling that we're achieving things in our reduction plan, sometimes it's preferable to just go at the smallest first. But remember now, I'm not saying that you should do one or the other, right? You should pay all of your 5 obligations, you should pay the minimum amounts every period. You don't want to default on your obligations, right? Because that has a very important implications on your credit score and the amount that people are willing to lend you in some future point in time. So you want to make sure that you comply with your obligations. But once you comply with the minimum obligations, then where do you put that extra amount to, right? So what I'm suggesting is that if you want to feel like you're achieving things in a quicker fashion, then assign that extra amount to the debt that has the smallest balance, so you will see the results very soon. If you're someone that's willing to wait and without getting disappointed and just go at it for a longer period of time, potentially, then the more reasonable thing to do would be to financially, that is, right, would be to actually pay the high interest expense. But reasonable is all dependent on who you are, right? And there's not an incorrect or correct approach. Financially, of course, we want to pay down the highest interest expense debt, but if that's going to make you frustrate and basically leave that, then that's not very helpful or reasonable. It may be more reasonable to do the smallest. Okay? So all of these things we will not be able to do if we don't have a log of our debt. It goes back to my first step, right? You have to know what you owe. You have to know the interest expenses in order to be able to do these 3 steps. Okay. I hope this is making sense. As you can see, the conversation is more about the reality of what's happening out there. There are theories behind what you should do and what are the steps, but this is more involving behavioral psychology, right? Which is in the end what really matters, right? Okay. So that's my suggestion as far as the debt management is concerned. And as you can see, there's homework for you because you have to, in a way, learn about yourself. The other side of the story, of course, is that on the one hand, you have obligations. On the other hand, what are the resources that you have at your disposal in order to comply with those obligations, in order to comply with your needs at some future point in time. So that gets us to the other part, which is investing, saving, and investing. And before we get to that part, I'd like to go over 2 very basic concepts with you. Okay? These are concepts that you have probably already heard about, but I want to make sure that as I go through this conversation, things are clear. So two concepts. The first one relates to return. When we talk about returns, basically it's what you're really trying to answer is, what am I going to get out of my investments? That's exactly what you're trying to do, right? What is it that if I use my funds, right, and I invest in certain type of financial assets, what am I getting out of that? So I have a very simple example for you. Let's suppose that you like coffee and you're a fan of Starbucks or any other coffee company. Let's suppose that you on April 22nd of 2022, so almost a year ago, a little more than a year ago, you bought Starbucks stock, and the stock price on April 22nd, 2022 for Starbucks was $82.23. Now, what does it mean to buy stock, right? If a company has 100 shares of stock, it means if you buy one stock, it means that you're the owner of 1% of that company. And as the owner of 1% of that company, you're entitled to receive the benefits of the profits. And those profits can be given to you in two different ways, right? And they're not mutually exclusive. One way is, well, I'm the owner of a company that if it's managed well, that company's value is going to increase. And so my 1% share of something that's growing in value is going to be more valuable too, right? So if I own 1% of a company that's worth $1 million, I'm going to be happy, but I'm going to be happier if I own 1% of a company that's worth $10 million, right? So my 1% share is going to be benefits. It's going to create benefits for me if the company is well managed. So if those profits are well reinvested in the company, and the company is more valuable as time elapses, I'm going to generate a return, a benefit for myself, profit. The other way in which profits can be distributed to the owners of the company. Who are the owners? The people that have these shares of stock. I have one share of the stock of this company that has 100 shares. So I have 1%, 1 out of 100, 1% of the company. The other way in which profits are given are through dividends, right? The company says, look, I'm going to take my profits. I'm going to use some of them to reinvest in the company. The rest of the money, I'm going to give it back to you in the form of dividends. So every 3 or 4 months, I'm going to send you a transfer saying this is your share of the profits. You own 1% of the company, you're going to own 1% of those profits, and those are called dividend payments. So if I buy a company that pays dividends, not all companies pay dividends, but if I do, then in my example, I would have bought a Starbucks stock at $82.23. And if I waited a whole year and then sold it a year later, that means I sold it on April 22nd, 2023, I would have sold it at $108.21 right here, right? So basically what we're doing here is essentially saying I have invested in a company and I bought this company for $82. I sold this company for $108. My share, right, of that company for $108. And during the time in which I was holding that stock, I received dividends equal to about $2.04. These are the dividend payments. Okay. So what was your investment? What was the amount of money that you invested in order to get these benefits? You invested the $82.23, right? That's the money that you use in order to buy the stock. Now, what was your profit from that investment? Well, you 1 year later, you were able to sell it at a higher price. So that's good news for you. Now, during that year, you also received those $2.04 of dividends. So overall, basically, your benefits during that year, your benefits of that investment is the sum of the selling price that you would get when you sell it a year later, higher, so good news, and the $2 that you received. Now, that profit always means that your benefits minus what you have to pay in order to earn those benefits. So your profit for your investment is going to be the sum of those two numbers, the $108 and the $2. And from that, we subtract the initial investment or the initial payment. So in order to get the $110 or so, right, this is about $110, you have to purchase the stock at $82. So the difference between the two, the difference between the benefits and the price that you have to pay for that stock, that's your profit. That was $28. So I hope my scenario is clear, right? I am hypothetically saying that you invested in a share of Starbucks stock, you paid $82, and 1 year later you sold it at a higher price, so you made a profit, but then you also received dividends. So what was your overall profit? The overall profit was $28. Okay? So what does that mean? It means that if your profit was $28 and your investment was $82, then your return, so what is the percentage, what does that profit represent as a percentage of my initial investment? 28 divided by 82, that's 34%. That's your return. So if you had to interpret that 34%, usually when we talk about percent, that means that it's 34 per 100. Okay, percent. So, if you have to interpret that, it means that for every $100 that you invested, you received about $34 as profit. So if you started with $100, by the end of the year, you would have ended up with $134. Okay. Now, these 34% is a very good return. So you would be a very happy investor if you had done this in actuality with Starbucks stock. I do have to tell you that a year ago or so, Starbucks did have a price that was being, at that point in time, negatively affected by market conditions. And so it was what we would call an undervalued price. So it was very cheap. That's why the profit is so high. The 34% is quite good. In reality, in stocks, we earn about somewhere between 11 and 12% per year on average if you invest in stocks in the stock market. So that 34% is quite interesting and quite high. But the point is that would have happened if you had bought that stock a year ago and sold it, a year later. All right, that's your return. So thinking about this, if you're saving money, one option to do, what do you do with that money that you're saving? One option is to leave it in the bank. Another option is to leave it under the mattress, right? Or to leave it somewhere where you're not earning any interest, but at least it's safe. The other option is to invest in the stock market, to invest in alternative ways of investing your money that earn you a higher return. I'll get to that in a few seconds. But think about this, right? You do want to be earning a return for your savings because you're eventually going to need to be able to fund your retirement, to fund the purchasing of your home, to fund your education needs, your family needs. So you have to be making your money work on your behalf. One way of making it work on our behalf is to invest in yes, risky investments, because there is risk when you invest in the stock market, but that's where you earn the higher returns. Okay? So for now, in my example, we've invested in a specific company, and that investing would have given us 34% return. Okay. I hope that the return concept is clear, right? If I said I earn a return of 25%, it just means that if you invest $100 today, that the expected return would be that at the end of the year, you would have $125 to your name. So 25%, 25 of 100. Okay. All right. So that's the return. The other basic concept that I want to discuss is inflation. And we all know about inflation. It certainly has been in the news recently. In essence, what I want to convey now is that inflation does the opposite as what a return does, right? A return helps us build, generate more money for our name, on our behalf. The inflation actually does the opposite, because it actually reduces the value of our money. So if you have an inflation rate of, say, 5%, as you see in the PowerPoint, and you put your money under the mattress, let's just say, right? You don't invest it, then those $100 that you have today, those $100 can buy you a certain amount of funds today. Okay? They can buy you can buy groceries, you can buy your needs, whatever they may be, but you can buy $100 worth of goods. Now, if you don't do anything with the money and you just leave it under the mattress, then if inflation is 5%, if prices increase by 5% every year, then a year from now, if you use those same $100, you will not be able to buy $100 worth of goods. You will only, to make it simple, $95 worth of goods. So your purchasing power is reduced by the process of inflation. So if your money is not working in a way such that it actually gives you a higher return than inflation, then you are worse off as time elapses. And the more time elapses, the worse you are off. And so you are putting your financial future at risk. Okay. So in essence, what we should visualize is that there's a tug of war, right, between returns. The returns are helping us build our wealth throughout time, and inflation is actually reducing the value of that wealth. Right? So in my example, if I had that, going back, remember that I earned 34%, right, on my investments. If I was my only investment and was earning 34%, and inflation was 5%, then actually what I'm getting as a benefit from my investment is a net 29%. So inflation is actually pulling down on the wealth and the benefit that our money is achieving. Okay, so think about that. And so what I like to propose then is that if you have options at your disposal, be very careful which options you take. Right, putting your money under the mattress would sound like it's a good thing to do in a way, because you're saying, well, it's safe. I know where it is, and it doesn't have to be your mattress, of course. Right, it could be on a place where you're not getting any return, you're not getting any interest payment, but at least you know it's safe. A lot of people, most people actually keep their money in places that are not really giving them a return. They just keep them in certain locations just because they can use that for cash management purposes. So if you're someone that has a checking account, when is the last time you checked with your institution and asked what interest they're giving you on your checking account? You may be unpleasantly surprised. Maybe the interest is actually either zero or very, very low. So many of us, put our money under the mattress, let's just say, hypothetical mattress. And just think of this, why you're putting your money under the mattress, what is the return that you're earning? That return is zero, right? The mattress does not give you any return, any compensation. Meanwhile, if inflation is around 5%, and I'm using inflation of 5% just as an example of what inflation looks like currently in the United States, but you can adjust this to your country, right? If your country has a higher inflation rate, then that cost is even higher. If it's lower, then it's lower, right? But if you use the 5% and you're putting your money under the mattress, earning 0%, then what is your overall return? Remember now, my overall return was 34% on the one hand, and 5% inflation reduces it to 29, right? So the difference between the two. Now, if you have the same situation where you're under the mattress is 0%, and your inflation is 5, then your overall return is going to be negative 5%. That is something to cry about, because in essence, you are destroying value. Every year that you leave the money there, it's actually making you less wealthy, actually destroying your savings by 5% every year. Now, if you leave it in the bank, and as I said, it really depends on where you are in the world, but the average rate that a bank account gives us here in the United States, this is from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation data, is around 1.54%. So imagine what banks are saying is, you leave the money with me, and while the money is there, it's going to earn 1.54% per year. So if you leave $100 there for a whole year, what will that get you? That will get you $1.54 at the end of the year. That's not something to be very happy about, right? And if you include inflation during that period of time, then the net result, right, the return minus the inflation, what do you get? It's still going to be a negative 3.46%. So you're actually destroying value as well if you leave it in the bank. Why? Because you're not earning a return that's above the inflation rate. The same thing goes if you invest in relatively safe securities. For example, a lot of people are investing in government bonds, right? Which is the government saying, okay, I'll borrow money from you by issuing a bond. You pay the bond and I'll give you interest. Now, that interest they give you is not going to be very high, because presumably the risk that you're bearing is not going to be very high. The higher the risk, the higher the return that's offered. So if you're investing in these kinds of securities, financial assets, where governments say, look, we're going to be fairly safe because I'm not going to default on my debt, you're going to earn around a 4.6% return. That return, as I said, is lower because there's lower levels of risk. But if you earn that, then what happens if inflation is still 5%? And what happens is that you're still earning a negative return of 0.6%. So in these first three scenarios, which are very common, people either put it under the mattress, leave it in the bank because they don't know that what's happening. They're just thinking, okay, I'll just leave the money there, but because I'll need it eventually, and I want to have easy access to my money. Or if they invest in safe securities, all these investments, if you have an inflation of 5%, are currently destroying value. So you are at an age where you're supposed to be building your wealth towards the future. Right now, if you do any of these first three, you're actually destroying your wealth. Okay, you're really delaying the time in which you feel like you can. Hey, I'm ready to be able to do better things for myself. If you invest in stocks, however, the average return on stocks has been somewhere between 11 and 12% per year. These are all per year figures. And so, if inflation is 5%, then your overall return is going to be positive. That's something that's better news, right? Because that means that you're building wealth as time goes by. Okay, so if you're falling so far under these first three categories, then I've got to propose that you rethink where you want to invest. Okay. So in essence, you can't really, none of us can really avoid inflation, right? But what we can do is try to earn a return, save money so that we can invest it and earn a return that will compensate us for that loss of purchasing power. Now, I like to then, kind of ask you that question that I think is very important to ask yourself as well, right? You know that when you have a financial obligation, you pay it. You know that when you want to, help others by donating your funds, you do it. So I'm going to propose that you decide to also, have an obligation towards yourself, that you consider helping yourself and your future families by investing in yourself, by paying yourself. So just as you get in a queue, let's just say hypothetical queue to pay a certain obligation, get in that queue to pay yourself. Pay yourself a certain percentage of your income for your future. Make that an obligation just as important as paying your rent bill, just as important as paying your utility bill, just as important as paying your grocery bill. Okay? You feed yourself today. Why don't you feed yourself tomorrow by making sure that you set aside funds for the future? Okay? So my essence, what I'm really asking is, have you thought about having an investment plan that will allow you to, to fund the home that you want to build, the college education that you want to provide, either to family or postgraduate education for yourself, retirement, vacations, right? Are you doing that? And just to re-emphasize this part, I like to just make sure that that I leave you with a few tidbits regarding saving money. If you invest $100 for 1 year and earn 10% return, how much would you have at the end of the year? Okay, that's more or less a quiz, right, of what we have just talked about. You invest $100 and you earn 10%, 10% of $100. That means that you would have additional amount of, what is 10% of $100? That would be $10, right? So at the end of the year, you will have what you started with, $100 plus the 10, right? So you have 110. Now, if you leave it there, if you leave the $10 in your account, then next year, the year after that first year of investment, how much are you're still earning the 10%, but you're earning 10% of what? You started with $100, but after a year, you have $110 in your account. Leave the money there. Leave the money there in your account. Set aside money that you can leave in an account, earning interest over interest. So the second year, you're going to be earning 10% over no longer $100, but you're going to be earning 10% over $110. So what that, in finance, what we call that is you're compounding your return. You're compounding your interest payment. You're in a way earning interest over interest. And that is what at the end will makes the difference for your future. And I'll give you an example very, very soon. Okay, so think about this. Compounding means that you are saving, earning an interest, a return, but you're leaving that money there so you can continue to build on itself. Okay, so as an example, how long will it take you to double your money if you were to invest in 10%? Usually the rule of thumb is we take the $72 and divide it by the interest expense. For example, in this case, how long will it take to double your money? If you earn 10%, okay, 72, this is a recipe. 72 divided by 10 is around 7.2, right? 7 years. Okay. So if you invest at 10% in 7 years, you would have doubled your funds. Now, how long would it take to triple your money? So if you invest at 10% for how long till you triple the money? It only takes you 11 years. Notice that you had to wait 7 years to double the money, but then you only had to wait an extra 4 more years to triple the money. So that means that the money is growing quicker. Why is it growing quicker? Because you are leaving interest over interest. You're letting your returns compound over themselves. Okay. That's very critical. Let me give you another example. Let's suppose that you're going to save for the next 30 years for your retirement. Okay. So for the next 30 years, you're going to save, and let's make it simple. You're saving $10,000 a year for the next 30 years. And then you're going to, after that, you're going to retire, and you're going to retire for, say, 30 years. So here you are, saving. If you're 30 years old right now, you're going to save till you're 60 years old, $10,000 every year. Okay. And after that, at the end of those 30 years, then you're going to just kind of retire, and you're going to pay yourself. You're going to have enough money to pay yourself an annual salary during your retirement years. So between when you're 60 years old and when you're 90 years old, you're going to be able to live off your savings for the first 30 years that you. Okay. So the question is, if you've done this, if you save $10,000 every year between the ages of 30 years and 60 years old, okay, what would your annual retirement salary be? How much would you be able to withdraw every year during your retirement years? You will be able to withdraw $206,000. Now, please remember now, you're saving $10,000 every year, right? If you were to put that under the mattress, how much would you have under the mattress? Let's see, $10,000 times 30, that will be $300,000, right? You would have $300,000 only if you would have gone under the mattress kind of approach. Here, because you are investing at 10% and you're letting interest compound, you are going to be able to pay yourself $206,000 per year every one of the 30 years of retirement. That's dramatically different, right? Now, if that's not enough good news, let me share an additional one. What happens if you start saving 5 years earlier? Okay. So you're not starting at 30, you're starting at 25 years of age, okay? Or 26, depending on how you're counting the years. What happens if you start 5 years earlier? How much would you be able to pay yourself as a retirement salary per year when you're 30 years of retirement? You will be able to pay yourself $392,000. So you're almost enabling yourself twice. You're almost your retirement amount, your annual retirement amount by twice, just because you started 5 years earlier. Okay, so starting earlier has a tremendous effect and impact on your benefit later in your years. Okay, this is all because of the compounding effect. Okay, so some guidelines. Okay, to start small, you don't have to save $10,000. What really matters is that you start forcing yourself to develop a habit of saving. If it's $20 or $10 a week, that's fine, but just start that habit. Define your time horizon. What am I saving for? Am I saving for the next 10 years, for the next 30 years? Be mindful of what your targets are and define that horizon. Okay. Make sure that you basically save a percentage of your income automatically. Don't force yourself to have to go to, let's just say, walk to the bank and put the money there. Make it automatic that out of your income, a certain percentage is sent to a new account, that's your savings account. And from that savings account, you invest. Okay? Make it automatic, and you should be saving around 10 to 15% of your income. Okay? And you should also have some sort of an emergency fund at your disposal. Generally, the emergency fund should be around 6 months of your total income. Where to invest? Don't go to the safe investments completely, because that would not give you a very high return. As I showed you before, that return would be negative. So a rule of thumb is to take 100 and subtract your age. So if you're 20 years old, 100 minus 20 is 80. 80% 30% of your funds, of your savings, should be invested in stocks because they give you a high return. The rest of your funds, the 20% that's left, that you can invest in relatively safer instruments. But right now, you're at an age where you're actually, what's best is that your highest income is still pending, it's still to come. So you're at an age where you should essentially invest and take risks because you can lose money at certain points of time. But overall, markets will tend to give you somewhere between 11 and 12% a year. Okay, when you do invest in consider investments that are not stocks per se or active funds. That means they charge you money in order to manage your stocks. Invest in what's called passive index funds, which basically they're less expensive. So one option is to invest in exchange traded funds. Those are typically like they replicate the markets. So let me give you an example. If you want to invest in the U.S. economy, then you would invest in this fund. This is the ticker or identifier for the fund. What they do is that they try to replicate the U.S. market. But if you want to specifically invest in, say, the energy sector, then you should invest in this fund. Basically, what they do is they take your money, they take everyone's money, and then invest them in companies that are energy related or information technology related, or in companies that invest in gold, for example, right? Or in real estate. That way, you're not having to choose where to invest. That way, you're basically letting others choose, but the costs are much lower. So don't put your money under the mattress, and don't try to, unless you're very good at it or you have a lot of expertise in it, don't try to pick specific stocks, right? My example, that example, in a way that 34%, it could be higher, but it could be very much lower. So just invest in funds that are, as I said, exchange traded funds will be a nice start. That basically people just put the money into specific companies and they just leave them there. So there's the cost of managing is lower, and so the cost of your charge are lower. My message is that you should not need to invest in lower return investments. Try to target higher return investments. Okay? And lastly, I'd like to share some behavioral research that we have. I think that's been very interesting. Financial health is really a function of two things: economic stability and emotional well-being. So economic stability means that you have to have a plan. You have to have, in a way, a very specific visualization of where you want to be in the next 20 years. Can you right now say, if you had to write this down, could you actually say where you want to be the next 10 years? Is it difficult? If it's difficult, it means that you have to start changing your mindset and making it much more detailed. So if you can say, oh, in 10 years' time, I want to be relaxed, that's very generic. But if you can say that in 10 years' time, I want to have a certain amount of money in my account, or I want to be able to, when I retire, be able to visit my grandchildren twice a year and invite everyone to a vacation once a year. If you can specify, if you can visualize something much more specific about where you want to be at, that's going to be much more useful. Because what we found is that people that actually have a very detailed and specific idea of where they want to be, they will be more motivated to control their money. So in order to have financial health, in order to have that economic stability, make sure that you have a very concrete visualization and detail about where you want to be. The more concrete that is, the more the higher likelihood that you will succeed. The other part is the emotional well-being. What it seems to me the case is that people that feel that they're in control of their finances are actually feel better. So people that have a lot of income, but they're always nervous about they don't feel that they're in control, they tend to have a much lower quality of life and there are psychological impacts to that than people that feel that they're empowered. So you could have low income levels and still feel more empowered than people that have higher income levels. What does empowered mean? It means that you know that you're taking the right steps in order to build your financial future. So you may have low income, but you are very strict about saving what you need to save. You're very strict about controlling the costs. You make sure that you're responsible about your purchases and so on and so forth. So being empowered doesn't really mean that you have high income. Of course, higher income does help, but being empowered means that you are controlling your destiny. You're taking the right steps in order to be able to provide for yourself in the future. So think about these two things, because what we found is that people that have a high target actually earn higher levels of retirement savings than people that have a low mental target, even though the people that have a low mental target may have higher income, which is amazing, right? So income is not the main determinant of how much savings you'll have at the end. It does help, of course, but what matters most is that you have a very strong and detailed mental image and that you feel empowered. With that, I think I'm already hitting the 1 hour mark, so I'd like to leave it there for now. But I hope that you force yourself to think about these things. And I think I've left you more with homework. I'm not asking yourself about where you are, but I hope that that you start a journey regarding this, you will thank your 60-year-old self is probably going to thank you quite a bit if you start doing this now. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Gonzalo. We just have 2 questions here in the chat box. One of them from Lynn asking, could you please give us names of applications for passive investment that work anywhere in the world and not country specific?
Right. So what you have to do is now it all depends on where you are, right? So what I would suggest is that you research brokerage services, brokerage services in your home countries. We tend to have 2 different options for that, right? If you can open up a brokerage account, of course you have to be, we're all here at postgraduate level, so you're all over 18 and so on, right? But you have to be able to open an account. And when you have really 2 selections to make, right? You can have full service brokers or what's called discount brokers. The full service brokers say, open an account and we will provide you with advice, with information, et cetera, but we will also charge for that. The discount brokers are accounts that say, look, through us, you can buy these kind of passive index investments that I mentioned, but we're not going to give you any advice. We're not responsible if you make an irresponsible decision. The advantage of doing that is that they actually only execute your orders. So they will charge you much less because they're not charging you for the additional benefit of advising you. So I would say that in your home countries, check with brokerage services and ask them how you can open up an account, and make sure that it's an account that is a discount broker, or make sure that the account does not reflect any any additional services. You only want execution of orders, and then select and then do your research. What are the ETFs that you can buy? Exchange traded funds, and do your research and select the one that you feel is more consistent with where you want to be at. So that's what I would say. I think this answer probably addresses most people in the world. There may be country-specific limitations. So for example, if you are studying here in the United States, you will likely not be able to open an account, a brokerage account in the United States, because you need a tax ID. You need to get a tax ID. You have to be working here or be a U.S. resident. So there are limitations in different parts around the world, but I would say that the best opportunity for you is to be able to open up those accounts in either your home country or in countries that allow you to invest in regional investments. So I know I made a generic response because it has to be very specific to your country's conditions, but that's what I would say first. So brokerage, discount brokers, and then research the kind of passive index investments that are at your disposal. Not all brokerage locations allow you to give you a very wide menu, but at least as a start, right? It's much better than leaving it under the mattress. That's for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Professor. I'm just in the interest of time, I'm going to take one more question here. So, Emmanuel is asking, is it advisable to invest this year? And if yes, which is the best to go for? Absolutely.
Don't forget that timing the market is very hard, right? People say, okay, I'm going to invest in certain, when I think the market is going down, when it's going, in the end, you should not try to time the market, because if you think about this, timing the market is almost like you're already speculating, right? You're speculating on the best moment. And we don't want to be in the business of speculating. We want to be in the business of making consistent investments. So creating a habit to investing. So this is what I would suggest. If you have, let's say, $1,000 at disposal for investments, don't invest them all immediately. Invest $100 periodically. Why? Because that way, as you're investing, you're already starting to save. But as you're investing, you can also determine whether prices are increasing or decreasing, right? So if prices are increasing dramatically, then it may be, investing $1,000 would have been, or decreasing dramatically, investing $1,000, then you don't have any more choices, right? Because you already invested all your money. So if prices are falling, you're going to be banging your head against the wall saying, why did I invest my $1,000 when I could have just waited a week and buy it at a lower price? So I would say that instead of investing the full amount, invest by portions so you can kind of see how the market conditions are going. If you see that markets are falling, then you may want to wait. And so the prices are much lower than, let's say, this week, and invest at lower prices. What matters in my mind is choose a company or a group of companies or a fund that you really believe in. And, prices are going to go up and down. But if you really believe, let's just say, if you want to invest in the Apples of the world, if it's a well-run company, when the price is low, it doesn't mean that necessarily that the company is going to continue to fall in value. That company, if it's well run, it's going to more likely rise in value. Overall, you're going to earn a 10%, 11% return on your investments. But don't invest all your money at once. Do it sequentially. And as you're doing that, observe how the market is going. If prices are going up tremendously, then you can wait until the prices fall, right? You have the luxury of time because of your age.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Professor, do you have the bandwidth for one last question?
Absolutely. I'm more than happy to answer questions.
Sounds great. So Hannah's asking that she struggles with financial management, and if you have any tips for her to switch her mindset and habits in a way that can set her on the right path.
I think the most important thing that you can do is sit down. And this maybe, I said, it could be interesting, it could be painful, but sit down and ask yourself, okay, what do I want to achieve in the next 15 years or 20 years, okay? Or 10 years, right? If it's too long for you, you have to know yourself a little bit more. So maybe 20 years is too long, say 10 years, and be very specific about where you want to be, what you want to achieve, right? So don't say, as I said in my presentation, don't say, I want to be well off, right? What does that mean? That's not specific enough, right? So I want to be able to purchase a home worth this amount, right? People that have a very specific target are people that are much better from a behavioral research perspective at controlling their debt, at saving more money, because they have a visual. And check periodically how you're doing, right? And as you see that you're saving towards that goal, that's in a way creates an incentive. But I would say, again, make sure that you visualize where you want to go and start saving, because as you start saving and controlling yourself, you also feel more empowered. And the more empowered you feel, the higher the likelihood that you will succeed. Because feeling empowered and taking action is much more important than income. Let me give you an example that I always share to my students when we're in the classroom. I typically recognize the fact that if you're in the classroom and I'm saying save, students will actually think, well, professor, I'm not in the savings mode right now. I'm studying, so I'm in a spending mode, right? So how can I save, right? What I ask is that, let's think about the coffee that you buy every day, right? A coffee that costs you $5. If you were to say, oh, I'm going to make great coffee, I'm not saying, consume bad coffee, right? I'm going to make great coffee at home. It's going to probably cost you not more than $1. You're saving $4 a day. So those $4 a day times 5 days are $20 or $100 a month. These are $100 that you can start saving on an account now. And by doing that, you will feel empowered. It doesn't mean that in the weekend you can't have your coffee, right? Your $5 coffee if you want to with friends. But if you do take these very small actions, you're going to feel like you are very much, you're powering yourself to working towards those goals. So have goals in mind and take actions that make you feel good about yourself, because those things will really help down the road. And believe me, right now you would say $20, $100, a month or $20 a month, what is that? I just showed you, I was very quick, but I just showed you my numbers that what matters is not the amount. What matters is that how that compounds throughout time. So start when? Start now.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Professor. And thank you everyone for your questions. Hope this was helpful and applicable to you. And, as the professor said, I hope you can take time to just sit down and really empower your mind to understand what is the financial future you aspire for. As we said earlier, a recording of this will be sent out in the follow-up email in the next few days. And we'll have many events for you, from webinars to one-to-ones on our HALT events section on our website. But that's all from us today. Thank you so much for your time and insights, Professor Gonzalez. It was a delight. And thanks for everyone for joining us. And we hope to see you again.
Good luck for everyone.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.